In this episode, we're going to talk about a problem that quietly breaks many security programs, even when the people involved are smart and hardworking. And that problem is letting your understanding of threats get stale while the world changes around you. When you first learn AI security, it can feel like you just need to memorize a set of common abuse cases and you will be prepared, but real threats are not frozen in time. Attackers adapt when defenses improve, new features create new openings, and tools that were rare last year become normal next year. At the same time, organizations change their own AI systems through new data sources, new integrations, new user groups, and new vendor capabilities, and those internal changes can reshape risk faster than any headline. The goal here is to build a practical habit of keeping threat understanding current without turning it into constant panic. By the end, you should be able to explain how threat understanding goes stale, how to refresh it on purpose, and how to keep your thinking aligned with what is actually happening. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A current threat understanding is a living picture of what harmful actions are plausible right now for your specific systems, with your specific users, and in your specific environment. Beginners sometimes treat threat knowledge as a static checklist, but the more useful view is that threat knowledge is an evolving map. The map includes likely abuse cases, the pathways they would use, the signals you might see, and the controls that would make those pathways harder. When the map is current, teams make faster decisions because they do not have to debate from scratch whether a scenario is realistic. When the map is stale, teams either ignore real warning signs or chase imaginary ones, and both patterns waste time and increase harm. In AI security, staleness can appear quickly because models and integrations evolve, and because the ways people use AI tools often expand beyond the original design. Keeping the map current is a discipline of attention, not a one-time research project. One reason threat understanding gets stale is that attackers change their tactics when they discover what defenses exist. When input filtering becomes stricter, attackers try more subtle prompt injection. When rate limiting is introduced, attackers slow down and spread activity across accounts. When retrieval sources are hardened, attackers shift towards social engineering and user-driven misuse to get sensitive data into prompts. Even without sophisticated attackers, curious users may experiment in ways that reveal unexpected behaviors, and those behaviors can become templates that spread. A beginner should understand that threat evolution is often an adaptation to friction, meaning attackers look for the easiest path, and when you block one easy path, they search for another. This is why defending AI systems is not only about patching one weakness. It is about observing how behavior changes when the system is constrained. A current threat understanding pays attention to those behavior shifts and updates assumptions accordingly. Another reason threat understanding goes stale is that the tools available to attackers change, and they change in ways that lower the skill barrier. A technique that required specialized knowledge a year ago might become a simple scripted workflow tomorrow, which raises likelihood even if impact is unchanged. Tool evolution can include automation that generates many probing prompts, frameworks that standardize prompt injection strategies, and services that help attackers scale testing across targets. It can also include general improvements in AI capabilities that make social engineering easier, because attackers can craft convincing messages and adapt them quickly. For AI security teams, the key is not to track every new tool name, but to track what new kinds of capability are becoming easy. If automation makes probing easier, monitoring and rate awareness become more important. If data manipulation becomes easier, integrity controls and change monitoring become more important. A current threat understanding focuses on capability shifts, because capability shifts change likelihood in a measurable way. The organization's own AI evolution is often an even faster driver of threat change than attacker evolution, and beginners should not underestimate this. A new integration that allows the model to access a sensitive data source can transform a low-impact tool into a high-impact target overnight. A new user group can change the likelihood of accidental misuse. especially if training and guidance do not scale with adoption. A vendor update can change model behavior, safety filtering, or logging formats, which can affect both risk and detection quality. A new data pipeline can introduce hidden sensitive fields into retrieval results, which can increase leakage risk without anyone realizing it. These internal shifts matter because threats are always a match between attacker capability and system exposure. When you expand exposure, you effectively invite new threat scenarios into your environment, even if attackers did not get smarter. Keeping threat understanding current requires watching internal change as a threat driver, not only external news. A practical way to keep threat understanding current is to define what signals should trigger a refresh of your threat assumptions. One signal is a change in system capability, such as adding a new tool integration, enabling a new action pathway, or expanding model access to new data sources. Another signal is a change in user population, such as moving from a small trained group to broad adoption, because behavior patterns change dramatically. Another signal is a change in incident or near-miss patterns, such as rising blocked prompts, increased policy violations, or repeated probing that suggests someone is testing boundaries. Another signal is a change in external context, such as new regulatory expectations, new widely used AI features, or high-profile incidents that reveal new attack patterns. The key beginner insight is that you do not need to refresh your threat map continuously. You need to refresh it when something meaningful changes. That is how you stay current without burning out. To make refresh practical, it helps to use a repeatable review routine that is short enough to actually happen. A routine might involve revisiting your top abuse cases, checking whether system architecture or data access has changed in ways that make those cases more or less likely, and asking whether any new abuse cases have become plausible. It also involves reviewing monitoring signals to see whether real behavior matches your assumptions. If you expected low misuse attempts but see frequent probing, your likelihood estimates were too low, and controls may need to be strengthened. If you assumed a certain integration was low risk but discover it pulls broader data than intended, your impact estimates were too low, and you may need to restrict data flow. A routine like this works best when it is tied to existing operational rhythms, such as regular change reviews or periodic risk reporting. Beginners should see that being current is often about disciplined repetition, not heroic research. Threat intelligence, TI, can support this work, but beginners should treat TI as input, not as a replacement for understanding your own systems. After the first mention, we will refer to this as TI. TI includes information about threats, techniques, and trends gathered from internal observations, industry reports, vendor advisories, and sometimes community sharing. The danger for beginners is to treat TI as a feed of scary stories, which can cause overreaction, or to treat it as irrelevant noise, which can cause blind spots. A more mature approach is to use TI to ask focused questions about your environment, such as, do we have the exposure pathway that this technique targets? And if we do, what controls do we have at that boundary? If a report describes prompt injection through retrieved web content, you ask whether your systems retrieve untrusted content and how that content is handled. TI becomes useful when it is translated into your architecture and your controls. Internal feedback is often the most valuable form of threat understanding because it reflects what is actually happening to your systems right now. Internal feedback includes security monitoring signals, help desk reports, user complaints about unexpected outputs, and engineering observations about unusual request patterns. It also includes the outcomes of investigations, because investigations reveal how an event actually unfolded, which often differs from initial assumptions. For AI systems, internal feedback can reveal subtle drift, changes in misuse patterns, and the emergence of new abuse paths through integrations. Beginners sometimes think only external attackers matter, but internal feedback is where you detect accidental misuse, misconfiguration, and integration errors that create risk without any attacker present. By treating internal feedback as part of threat understanding, you keep the threat map grounded and current. It also helps you avoid the trap of preparing for rare threats while ignoring common failures that repeatedly cause harm. Keeping threat understanding current also means updating how you evaluate likelihood and impact as evidence accumulates. If you monitor repeated probing attempts, your likelihood estimate for extraction abuse cases should change, because you now have direct signals that someone is trying. If you see sensitive data appearing in prompts frequently, impact becomes more urgent because the system is already being exposed to risky content. If you learn that the AI system can take actions in downstream systems, impact increases because outputs can translate into real changes. If you improve access controls and narrow data retrieval, likelihood can decrease because the attack surface shrinks. This is not about manipulating numbers to look good. It is about reflecting reality. Beginners should understand that a threat map is a model of reality, and models must be updated when evidence contradicts assumptions. The purpose of updating is to direct resources wisely, not to create paperwork. A common misunderstanding is that staying current requires tracking every new AI technique, every new vendor feature, and every new news story, but that is not sustainable and it is not necessary. What is necessary is to track a small set of evolving themes that reliably influence risk. One theme is exposure expansion, meaning new ways for data and actions to flow through the AI system. Another theme is automation, meaning misuse becomes easier and more scalable. Another theme is policy boundary pressure, meaning users and attackers keep testing what is allowed and what is blocked. Another theme is integrity pressure, meaning data and model behavior can be influenced through changes and poisoning. Another theme is dependency risk, meaning vendors and third parties can introduce outages or unexpected behavior changes. If you watch these themes, you can interpret new events quickly without chasing every detail. Beginners should learn that being current is about being oriented, not being encyclopedic. It also helps to practice thinking in terms of controls and compensating controls, because threat evolution often forces you to adjust defenses rather than invent entirely new programs. Compensating controls, CC, are alternative safeguards used when a preferred control is not feasible, and after the first mention we will refer to these as CC. For example, if a vendor changes a safety feature and you cannot immediately replicate it, CC might include narrowing access, disabling high-risk integrations, and increasing monitoring until a stronger solution is implemented. If a new abuse pattern appears, CC might include tightening thresholds and adding human review gates for certain outputs while the root cause is investigated. Beginners sometimes think controls must be perfect to be useful, but the reality is that temporary compensations are often what keeps systems safe during transitions. Keeping threat understanding current includes knowing which CC are available and when to apply them, because threat changes can outpace long-term engineering work. As threat understanding evolves, communication becomes a core skill, because the people who build and operate systems need to know what has changed and why it matters. If you identify that a new integration increases data exposure risk, the engineering team needs to understand the risk story and what control changes are required. If you detect increased probing attempts, operations teams need to understand what signals to watch and what escalation triggers apply. If you discover a new misuse pattern among users, training and policy teams need to know how to adjust guidance to reduce accidental risk. Clear communication prevents the threat map from living only in one person's head, which is a major source of staleness. It also prevents teams from dismissing warnings as vague fear, because you can explain the change in terms of concrete system behavior and evidence. Beginners should see that threat understanding is a shared asset, and shared assets require sharing in plain language. Keeping threat understanding current also requires resisting the temptation to overcorrect after a high-profile incident or a dramatic story. After widely publicized AI incidents, organizations often swing toward blanket bans or extreme restrictions that create shadow usage and undermine trust. A more disciplined response is to use the story as a prompt to check whether the same exposure pathways exist internally, then adjust controls proportionally. If the story involves vendor outage, you improve degraded modes and continuity planning. If the story involves data leakage, you review data access boundaries and logging practices. If the story involves prompt injection, you review how untrusted content is handled and how instructions are separated from data. The goal is learning, not panic, and learning requires mapping the story to your environment. Beginners should understand that hype is contagious, but disciplined assessment can turn hype into useful action without unnecessary disruption. Finally, It is worth emphasizing that staying current is a culture and process choice, not just an individual skill. If the organization rewards speed without review, threat understanding will go stale because systems change faster than risk thinking. If the organization treats reporting problems as blameworthy, people will hide near misses and the threat map will miss critical signals. If the organization does not allocate time for periodic review, threat understanding will become a side hobby rather than an operational requirement. A mature program makes threat refresh routine, ties it to change management and monitoring, and treats updates as normal maintenance. For beginners, this is encouraging because it means you do not need to be a genius to stay current. You need a process that makes staying current inevitable. When the process exists, the organization adapts smoothly as attackers and tools evolve. As we close, keeping threat understanding current means treating your threat landscape as a living map that must be refreshed when systems, users, vendors, and attacker capabilities change. Threat staleness happens when teams rely on old assumptions while exposure expands. Tools lower the barrier for abuse, and internal changes create new pathways for harm. A practical approach uses clear refresh triggers, short repeatable reviews, and a balanced use of TI alongside internal evidence for monitoring and investigations. Updating likelihood and impact estimates as data accumulates keeps priorities honest and defensible, while focusing on evolving themes keeps the work sustainable. Communication, CC, and disciplined learning from real signals prevent overreaction and prevent complacency at the same time. When you build these habits, your AI security program stays oriented to reality, which is the only place where risk management can truly protect trust while enabling progress.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.